Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. I'd say a special teaching, an opportunity to be in community. With so much going on in education, didn't want to let the week go without joining you all here in the virtual space. My name is Natasha. I am the executive director here at Raise Your Hand, and have the real pleasure to be joining you in these virtual streets to talk about what's happening in education. So we typically do our weekly teachings on Tuesday. However, life's and the schedules are demanding. So what we will do is always try to hold these spaces throughout the week. So whether we return to our regularly scheduled teaching Tuesdays, which we plan to do, of course, or we catch you on a Friday. I think our last two, this makes our second session, maybe third, that has been held on a Friday. So it's a lot going on, depending on how much you engage in media or social media, or if you wrap a bubble around yourself and you don't, it's all good. Um, Today, we want to have a conversation that is really dispassionate around, but really to demystify is a word that's deep in my mind, in my heart, around what we feel like we can do in this moment, right? There's, parents. Yesterday, we held a solidarity call with local school council members, caregivers, and community members to talk about this moment. And I can tell you the resounding stance was parents just want to know, how does this impact my local school? And ultimately, the conversation revolved around, what do I need to know, particularly for those who are on LSCs, who hold responsibility around, the school's CIWP, the school's budget, so you name it. So the school community is intrigued. I won't say intrigued, is interested in watching what's happening. But by and large, we see ourselves as, as Raise Your Hand has always been. I think an opportunity for us to, lean into the community discourse and really provide just, keeping us grounded in what is important and what is happening in our schools, and what we can do to stay connected and feel less alone. And it really follows our mantra, which is to don't CPS alone. So, again, thanks for joining, whether you are here, again, like I said, joining us live, or you'll catch us on the replay. We have a good agenda for today. We'll, talk a little bit about some opportunities. But what I really want to do is just to first start with unpacking a little bit about, why we really describe a little bit about the pillars of work, right? And so when we see these teach-ins as an opportunity to talk to the parent who is busy, on the go, may not have the time really or capacity to uh, read our newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks, or to come to the solidarity call, or tap into the meetings. This is an opportunity where we spend about 45 minutes to share some information that you need to know. Um, and so we really don't get stuck in in the issues or the challenges. We really are looking for, what are the opportunities for us to build, right? To build power. So if we look at this work as an elephant, we really try to take a chunk of that, and really, just be in this moment, in community, around what do we need to do to move forward, right? What are the courses of actions that we can collaborate? What's passionate for you at your school? How can we advocate together, right, to push this district, so that ultimately what is that the impacts of, the current events that's happening around CPS's finances, and the fiscal cliff that the district finds itself in, and it's also not new, right? If you have been in the district, say if you have a high school student currently right now, you have felt the implications or the impacts of previous CPS, um, financial woes. So today, I'm also excited that we're not just going to talk about our LSCs, the elected school board. We're also going to have a friend of Raise Your Hand come on and share, like I said, dispassionate to really, perspective and analysis to really demystify the current state of CPS finances and really how did we get here and what parents need to know. So I'm excited about our conversation for today. So let's jump into it. I want to talk a little bit more about the solidarity call that we had yesterday. You all should tap into those. They happen monthly around the second Thursday of the month. And we may have to plan around that depending on the calendar or the season, but we come together with LSCs, parents, community members. Sometimes we'll have presenters come on depending on current events, right? So CPS recently, um, held a board of ed meeting where they approved the 5-year strategic plan. And in that 5-year strategic plan was, what I would say is the beginnings of a really comprehensive approach to closing the opportunity gap for Black children in CPS, who for decades, I'm a CPS K through 12 alum. And so, there's a story that alums can tell you that this is not new, that this is generational. And so we really want to be in a position where we don't get stuck in that we also don't repeat or miss opportunities to organize because we've been here before. So we talked about that, and we were joined by the director of CPS's Black Student Success, Eugene Robinson. It's a new position that was created this year that was born out of the Black Student Success Working Group, where there were around 60 Chicagoans who really agitated CPS and the conditions to create recommendations for shifting the academic rigor, the opportunity, right? Investing in our neighborhood schools, creating holistic approach. What community resources can we bring? Philanthropic resources are out there for us to collaborate with the academic level. So we also had a friend of Raise Your Hand, Don McCoy, who was the executive director of the To and Through project. Um, and so I know that they are working with, a lot of parents across the city. So it was good to have Dom in the space to share some words about making those connections. And I know Dom and his team have approached us around, we've had a working group about this. I won't say a working group, a focus group discussion around how does the LSC use that to and through data to connect to the CIWP, to track those on track, metrics. How can we use that as a part of the principal evaluation tool, right? So that we are also charting current success and also post-secondary as well. And it's not just at the high school level. Through their, research, you will see that there's also a K through 8 component. So it was a really good call yesterday. And then again, we didn't spend much time talking about the current events. It was very much, like I said, parents and folks who were on the call, said, hey, how does this impact us? What we've seen cuts before, we've seen what it feels like to have conditions that are pretty bare bones. So folks are thinking about how to start preparing for that. I heard an idea from an LSC member who said, hey, we might be thinking about how to add this to our LSC agenda to start doing some planning or open up discussion around, what this could potentially look like should there be financial impacts to the way the schools currently operate. So it was a really good call. Um, and I think what I'll land with on that call is, it's just really important for best practices to be shared. One of the CPS not CPS, one of the LSCs that was on was talking about how they just took a very difficult decision because they feel like they cannot move forward with the current principal that they have. so that they are working with their school community support, building community support for CPS to come in and really take some action around some pretty unacceptable um, textbook things that, breach a contract, breach trust with the school community. So it was good to have those LSC members who were on with us last night to share how we can support them in their push for accountability and real transparency. So there was some exchange of information, and community folks were, definitely tapping in to say, "Hey, we've been there. Let us know how we can help." So those are the types of spaces why I really think recharge my battery and really staying focused on the work, right? Yeah, I'll land there in terms of the solidarity call. I want to take a few more moments just to briefly go over a few more areas before we bring our guest up for today. LSE vacancies. Look, there's a lot of talk, and I'm going to make this connection about LSEs and the elected school board. How do they work together? Will they work together? The answer is, of course, they'll work together. We need to be building bridges right now with those with those who are running for seats on the November 5th election. And a lot of LSCs have questioned like, oh, am I allowed to? We're supposed, according to ethics, we're supposed to be, apolitical and not engage in that. Give me just one moment. All right. That LSCs are like, hey, we cannot engage in politics. So, according to the ethics policy and compliance areas, so we're not engaging in the elected school board. And it's like, well, you are a citizen, right? So, and also as part of the LSC duty, it's a direct line of accountability from the LSC to the elected school board. So, what we're advocating for is for LSCs to fill those vacancies on your councils. We are really building a momentum with LSCs from the far south side, in specific neighborhoods across the city. We are open to coming to support you with efforts on how to fill those vacancies. Reach out to our organizers, send us an email, and we see this as important because um, I would say, as the process towards a fully elected school board comes to pass, and we'll just go forward and say, yes, there's an election in November that will seat a hybrid board. There'll be half elected, 10 of them will be elected, 10 of them will be appointed, plus an appointed president that can live anywhere in the city. But in 2027, there will be, I should step back, in 2026, there will be another election to have a fully elected board that'll take their seats in 2027. So we see that window as an opportunity to really build our LSCs, to support y'all, right? We know that uh, it is not for a lack of interest that parents and communities are not serving on their LSCs. A lot of times parents say we've been pushed out. We've been there, we've served. We really, parents are really looking for a commitment and an investment in their time. So when they volunteer to sit on these LSCs and take on these responsibilities, they really are looking for more of a transactional relationship and to really build community. So it's both. We have to dispel this myth that LSCs are disempowered because there's a lack of care. That's not true. Oftentimes, we need to think about the conditions that are created that make parents and community not feel engaged. Transparency. We can't fill LSC vacancies if we don't know they exist. So on some of the district's, websites, we have really pushed for there to be more transparency to see where those vacancies exist, and definitely appreciate the strides forward that the district has taken. So you can go to CPS's website. We've shared this before. You can just actually Google CPS LSC vacancies, and it'll take you to a map where you can plug in your home address. As a community member, you can plug in your home address and it'll show a list of schools that you can serve as a community rep. If there are less than two, you can serve on that LSC, run to fill that vacancy. If you are a parent of a child enrolled in a CPS school, and you do not work for the district, as long as you are eligible, that same page will tell you the eligibility requirements. You can run to fill that vacancy. And so it's not an election, but an LSC can vote on any parent or community member who lives in that attendance boundary or voting district. Some of the selective enrollment or magnet schools may even have open citywide of eligibility for you to be seated. So check that website, fill those vacancies. Let's build our LSCs because we really find ourselves in a pivotal moment to really have a direct line of communication to the decision makers. Now, with the moving towards that elected school board, there's some accountability that we can have. So moving away from this, appointed governance is really important for us to be building our own, right? So let's fill those vacancies. Reach out if you need support. One of the things that's really important that is on our, sheet that I wanted to talk about is there's a new LSE reference guide. If you haven't already seen that, check it out. I'll drop a link here in the chat in a moment. Um, if you're on an LSE and you have taken your training, but you are otherwise, you have questions in the moment, I always, say if it weren't for the, books app on my phone, I downloaded the reference guide. And in meetings, when I didn't know what I didn't know, I would just do a keyword search. And it's really helpful. It's a really helpful tool for you to help guide discussions so that your LSE can be more effective and efficient. I would do some prep before meetings, look in that reference guide, and see what you all need. A lot of your questions are in that guide, and with a keyword search can really help create some empowerment on your LSE. So check that out. Uh, LSE training modules. We have a training cohort. We, raise your hand, really pushed for there to be for the district to restart the community certified training, which is essentially we are external partners of the district to do community-based LSE module training. So all of the 9 modules you can get with us to empower your knowledge, to help answer questions. So we have folks who are in the cohort of trainers who have been doing this work for over 20 years. Those who are passionate, sit on multiple LSCs from different perspectives, from parents, community, and from educator perspective. So join us for those. Stay tuned to our website. We'll be posting updated training opportunities for that. And then before we start to transition, I do want to talk about something I'm really excited about, y'all, is our new podcast. Oh, before I go to the podcast, I just want to again say, if you aren't already, please attend your local LSC meetings. There are monthly LSC meetings at your school. If it is not posted on your website, please ask your school administrator or your LSC parent reps that you might be connected to make sure that it's advertised on the school's website, the school's marquee, beyond just the front door of the school. Attend those LSC meetings. Ask if there's a virtual component for you to attend or listen in, even if you can't be in the room. I've used this example before. Jones does has a YouTube channel. So they have what's called like a meeting owl. So it brings like the virtual space into the room so you don't feel as disconnected. I'm not sure if you're able to sign up for public comment or what that mechanism looks like, but at least you can watch the virtual meeting. Parents do appreciate, even that sort of, input, but I know there's schools that are still meeting on Google Meets or have a bridge to attend the meeting on Google Meets. So if your school isn't already advertising it widely, creating a virtual bridge for the busy on-the-go parent, ask them to do that and make that happen. While talking about, getting the word out and having conversation, I'll go back to what I had launched a little bit ago was our new podcast. Something that I had been dreaming about for a long time was, how can we have an opportunity to talk to parents who, again, are busy on the go? The reason why we hold spaces like we are today. And so we just launched our From Selected to Elected. unpacking the the Chicago Board of Education. I'll say that again: from selected to elected, unpacking the Chicago Board of Education. We are available wherever you get your podcast. So if you are on those long road trips, or just geek out and want to have a quick way to stay connected and tapped into the process from going to an appointed or mayoral appointed board to a fully elected board, tap in, subscribe to our podcast. We have a really good lineup. I'm excited about our next episode, but episode one is up now, where we have Charlie Tauchi, who's a professor at Loyola, who joined us to talk about the history of CPS boards of education. So go and check that out. Like I said, again, on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, we are there. And then I'll save my last point, but for after our guest, as I close out my remarks. But I mentioned a little bit ago, this Chicago is having its first elected school board process on November 5th. Early voting is underway at the super sites downtown. Go to the Chicago Board of Elections website to get connected if you aren't already registered. It's not too late to do that, to participate in this civic engagement. I'll say there's also a lot of tools on the Board of Elections website, where you can not just understand which CPS school board district you will be voting in. You can also print up a sample ballot. I encourage everyone to download a sample ballot. The sample ballot will show you how many offices are on the ballot for November 5th. There are a lot. I need you all to be patient. There are about 70 judge ballot vote, I would say ballot positions. So we will encourage, patience and diligence in that civic engagement to get out and vote for the school board candidates. We really need to have to really see democracy in this way. Raise Your Hand has released a candidate questionnaire where we really dive deep into some questions. Thanks for all y'all's partnership and submitting questions. And we really feel like we had a good set of not just questions, but the responses are live on our website. I'll drop a link in the chat in a moment. There are community forums coming up. We'll be posting those on our social media, hosted by Kofi, by other community partners. Chalkbeat has on their YouTube a series of I would say they weren't really candidate debates, but I did feel like at some points there was some debate. So check those out on Chalkbeat's YouTube. Those are really informative. All right. So tap into the elected school board process, stay connected in this, what we really call this pillar of work, which is really democracy that is very much connected to LSCs. So please go and find a vacancy and fill that, and then get to the poll, make a plan to get out to vote by November 5th for school board candidates. All right, let's transition. So one of the things, like I said, going back to what I mentioned about yesterday's meeting and the conversations that I've been having with parents and community members and really my thought partners, is like, given this current state of where CPS, this fiscal cliff, what do we need to know, right? So really, just, dispassionate is just the best word that I can use to really describe it. We want to just have a conversation with community partners around, what do we know? What do we need to know? What's the history? What caused some of this? How did we get here? Is really the anchoring point. And then what are some possible, what do we need to know in terms of possible solutions and courses of action? So I want to bring up our friend Stephanie, who has supported Raise Your Hand in our Peer Illinois work, which is our statewide advocacy that we do to bring resource equity to schools, particularly those who serve the most marginalized, and who have, really been deeply impacted by the budget shortfalls that we see in Chicago, that are unique to Chicago. But that's what we'll focus on today. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming on and agreeing to be with us. Stephanie is a professor of sociology, and has really provided a deep analysis over the years, and has written about this in a myriad of spaces and focuses it in her work. So, Stephanie, I want to welcome you, say some words, and then I know you have a presentation for us for today. So I'll pass the mic.
Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, really appreciate raise your hand, giving me the opportunity to talk directly to parents, because I do all this work that I think is actually very relevant for the community, but I don't really get many spaces to engage the community. So I appreciate this opportunity. And my work has been looking at the history of CPS's finances since the 1990s. So a lot of my work right today is going to be focused at that 2000 to 2018 period, but I did try to update some of the numbers just to give you guys an understanding of where we're at in the current moment as well. So, Natasha, we were talking about these current proposals, of how to cover the budget gap, right? There's an anticipated $1 billion budget gap. And as you rightly said, we've been in a perennial state of a fiscal crisis in Chicago. This is not something new. But in some sense, we do have to think about how we got there in order for us not to sink further into these kinds of crises and potentially get ourselves out. And what we see proposed is a couple of things, at least to cover about $300 million of the shortfall, the anticipated shortfall. And on the one hand, what we see is in the past practices, they would make cuts inside schools, they would cut staffing, cut programs, close schools for these kinds of fiscal reasons. What we see is a different track being taken today, where Raise Your Hand has been part of the social movement to try to get more resources and staffing inside schools. So how does the movement preserve our gains, right? And on the one, so instead of just going the cutting route, we have these kinds of proposals that are being offered. One proposal that was made by the school board when they passed the budget in July, well, actually it was made by CPS and the school board approved the budget, was to skip the pension payments, and that would skip about $175 million that the system is mandated to contribute to the teachers' pension system. The second proposal is to take out a loan. It's been characterized as a high interest loan. But in this case, the loan would cover both the pension cost as well as the 4% 4% raises that teachers are getting this year. Natasha, could you toss up that PowerPoint now? Because I'm thinking, let's game out what would be the financial impact of these loans, and if you take a $300 million loan, and we don't really have a firm number of what that interest rate is going to be. Low, but municipalities tend to borrow at a lower rate than private citizens. They tend to borrow around 4 to 5%. High interest loans for city governments are 6 to 8%. So I'm being the most conservative and going at the 6% loan. And they did say that this loan would be for over 20 years. So if you look, the interest payments that would be made for that loan would total $215,000, almost $216 million. Sorry. Bringing the total cost of their loan up to about $516 million. And I will say this does not include the financing fees. Another thing that we need to consider when we take out this loan is how would this add to the annual budget gap? And so in order to pay off this 20-year loan, we would be making a $26 million payment, or debt service payment is what we call it, to fill it. But this $26 million will then expand the budget gap going forward. And so can also talk about how did we get here. And I think the story of how we get here is also connected to these kinds of past practices of skipping pension payments and of taking debt in order to finance what we call operations cost, or the everyday types of activities of city agencies. So one thing that was done throughout the 2000s is adopting this kind of school choice policy, where they expanded the number of charter schools, selective enrollment, magnet schools, all of this. And what we see is that the number of schools that CPS opened during this time outpaced the enrollments that CPS had. So between 1995, in 1995, CPS had 553 schools, and by 2018, then the number of schools was up to 660, even though CPS enrollments had declined by about 40,000 students. Now, I bring this up because it's relevant to, like, how did we pay for these new schools? And this gets us to why is our debt burden so high? CPS's current debt burden is 7.8 billion dollars, right? And to put this in perspective, in 1995, we started with $0 in debt. And so over the course of the early 1990s and 2000s, CPS was taking out debt to finance some of these new schools. But then by 2014, CPS takes a new strategy. And this is where you see academics get very concerned about this particular strategy. And they start taking out debt to pay for operational expenses. So teacher salaries, what's happening inside schools, and also to pay off debt. So they're taking out debt to pay for debt. And we call this in my field the debt trap, where where municipal governments have to take out debt to pay off debt. And so they're trapped in the cycle of taking out debt. And of course, like, why does this matter? Oh, sorry. Why does this matter is that in 2023, CPS spent $729 million just to pay down their debt, so to service the debt. And that consumes about 8% of the budget. In an optimistic note, the debt peaked in 2018, when we were paying over 11% of the budget, or nearly 11% of the budget, toward debt financing. So we're on better grounds today, but maybe we should think about not losing ground to debt going forward. The next reason, another reason we can look at why CPS has ended up in this kind of financial crisis is that there was a history of both CPS system and the state skipping their pension payments, or what people call pension holidays. So if you look, in 2004, sorry, I've got too many charts, right? Actually, in 2004, the CPS's pension system was 100% funded. Today, by our 2023, the pension system is only 47% funded. What this means is that they only have 47% of the revenues they need in order to pay out the pensions from today going forward. So we might end up in a crisis where our retired teachers and educators and staff may not be able to access their full pension benefits. And so we can ask, well, why are the pensions so underfunded? And one reason is that between 2003 and 2013, the city and the state failed to make their mandatory employer contributions. They skipped the pension payments. So in some sense now, you have the state of Illinois steps in and says, oh, well, we're going to enact what we call a pension ramp. You have to make your mandated pension contributions, but then we also are going to ramp up, so that way you're making contributions that will get the system back to a state of health. What this means is that above that mandatory contribution, CPS is about $400 to $500 million of CPS's budget is devoted to also providing for that pension ramp. Now, if you put both of these together, where you have the debt financing, which is 8% of the budget, and the pension cost, which is 11% of the budget, we're talking about 19% of the budget. Now, a part of that was always going to be in place because schools do need to issue debts. Schools do need to pay their pension cost. But if we didn't have excessive debt, if we didn't have to take on like these the pension ramp today because we skipped payments in the past, CPS would have about $800 million more to pay for schools today. And the anticipated budget deficit is $1 billion. So this 800 million would have gone, significantly far to close this hole. And what I think people are concerned about with this proposal of the loan, taking out a loan to finance like the pensions and also like operations cost, is that we're going back to these kinds of old practices that got us in this crisis in the first place, Natasha.
Thank you for that. Um, for that analysis. So when that question that's coming up for, I know, talking to parents, community principals who, say, how do we, really deconstruct, um, you know, the conditions, what's the solution? What do they need to know in order to, for the LSC to take this on their meeting agenda? What's the discussion that, schools, need to start having in this moment? What would you say to that?
So I think we have to think about the short-term solutions and the long-term solutions. The long-term solutions are basically how do we get more revenues for our schools? And these are going to take more like a longer process to accomplish this. But then we also have to do with the budget deficit of today. And that's why we also have to think about short-term solutions. A couple of short-term solutions that we can take that would be alternatives to taking out a loan would involve the city stepping in and paying for the pension contribution. It used to be the case that the city paid for the teachers' pension system. Former Mayor Lori Lightfoot shifted those responsibilities from the city over to CPS. And now CPS has $175 million that they need to contribute. So if we were able to shift that back to the city has more opportunities and resources to fill that $175 million hole than what the schools are able to manage. For instance, the cities have what we call like a rainy day fund, which is the money they have in reserve in their bank account for these kinds of moments where it's a rainy day. You need to patch things up. Alternatively, they could declare a TIF surplus and take money from the TIF funds, the tax increment financing districts, which is a whole nother ballgame to explain. But we have these districts that have pots of money that aren't always encumbered or earmarked for future projects. And if you have this kind of surplus, that surplus could go to patch up these kinds of budget gaps. A second thing too that could be a short-term solution is CPS could actually raise their property tax levy. So, CPS is restricted for how much property taxes they can extract, but right now they're not at the top level of what they can take. And so you could raise that up. I think that's maybe a little bit more politically difficult to accomplish, but that's still on the table as an alternative to taking out a loan. Long-term strategies. We need more money for our kids. Period. Right. We could fight both at the state and at the federal level. We don't only have to focus on what happens on the local level. The state isn't fully funding its promises to pay for schools, right? They have their own equalized debt. Their equalized contribution to schools that they're not fully funding. If they lived up to their own promises, what they would give to schools, we would have $1 billion more, which would mean we wouldn't have a deficit this year, right? At the federal level, we know that the federal level could contribute more to local school systems if pressured, right? Like if you think about the last 5 years under COVID, the federal government provided CPS with about $500 million a year. And now that those federal revenues are being taken away, this in part explains why we have this budget deficit coming up, right? So why can't we put the pressure on the federal government to take care of all of the nation's children? Would be the argument there. Another like long-term solution yeah, I'm sorry, I have to refer to my notes. At some point when you're just talking, you forget, right?
Okay, it's okay to, take a moment. I think this is really helpful.
Oh,
Again, we have been here before. And so for many, this is a very good refresher.
mm-hmm.
You were filling some knowledge gaps that I had, right? That was, I returned back to the city when my daughter was in seventh grade. So some of this history is, things that I've read. But it's good to plug some holes and make some connections to some things. So this is helpful for those who are on and joining us. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. I do see we have one, so we'll get to some questions here in a moment. So drop your questions in the chat. If you have, um, you know, comment, feel free to drop in the chat and engage with us. This is a conversation that is really built to, again, help demystify the current conditions. So I really appreciate you being here, Steph.
For sure. And I think you make a great point. We've been hearing all this stuff for the last 2 decades, right? But sometimes you just need a moment where you bring it all together, right? So you can have some reflection on how did we get here? And like you said, some clear-minded, dispassionate reflection too.
So if you like, we can take a question.
Sure.
Heather is asking 2003 to 13, why did Chicago skip that pension payment, those pension payments? That was daily. How could they do that?
Uh, because no one stopped them. What Daley and his administration considered was that the pensions were fully funded. So they thought that if they could take a pension holiday, they wouldn't have to make this, multi-$100 million contribution to the pensions, and they could shift that to other parts of their city budget. In my view, they were very engaged in this kind of downtown city building projects, and they needed to pay for it. And they short shifted the schools in order to pay for the development goals. In their mind, if they just take a little at the top from the beginning, it wasn't going to sink the pension funds to where they're only 47% funded today. But yeah, that gambit didn't work. And I would also say too, they have this kind of like trickle down notion that if the city just pays for all this development for, corporations and for the wealthy, that you attract them to the city, it'll trickle down into the neighborhoods. But now we've got the evidence that after 20 years, it certainly didn't trickle down. It just keeps taking from the neighborhoods. Are there any other questions, Natasha? Tasha, you're muted.
No, I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I got one texted to me. So let me
Fantastic.
transition over. And this is from a school leader. How are we going to deconstruct the policies and structures that produce the inequities of all of this? And I know that's part of a larger question that's being asked in a myriad of ways. I heard it
Mm-hmm.
at one of the recent elected school board forums. So this one is one that really does cross, I think it's at the intersection. And definitely finance has been the root of it. We've seen the disinvestment of our schools that led to conditions where in 2018, the students at Harper and Hope and Robeson High School were taking art and PE classes online,
Mm.
allegedly, right? So that question is really important. And I guess we can go each question. So for how this relates or intersects with funding, is there a way that what do we need to know about deconstructing and really having a participatory, I think, mindset in terms of how we
Mm-hmm.
can not repeat what we've already experienced?
One thing I think is that, you know, when people are taxed, we're anticipating that our tax dollars are going to go to the common good. However, when you look today, when CPS is $7.8 billion in the hole, and we basically end up paying almost double the original amount of our debt in terms of interest and financial fees, what we can think of is that the financial community today benefits the most from this strategy. They're able to get 10% of the CPS's budget flowing into their coffers and not into our schools. So if you're thinking about inequality, like the people on the top are rigging the system so they can get money from the tax base when the tax base is hoping that it goes to our children, right? So I think cutting off these points where the financial sector can extract money is one way that I think we could work on these kind of more like structural features of how inequality works in America today, right? Second, I think part of the reason the federal government does not contribute a fair share to our children is that, back in Ronald Reagan days, like this is part of Reaganomics. Reagan cut the federal contribution to cities, right? In part, he was motivated by this, I think, this kind of racialized and racist discourse that painted cities and urban areas as a code word for Black. And so at the federal level is like saying, hey, look, we shouldn't be paying for the cities and urban areas. They should have to pay it on their own. So the federal level went from giving about 20 to 24%, depending on where you're at, to schools, to urban schools. They retrenched it back to where now the federal government only provides about 10% of the budget. If we can get the federal government back to pre-Reagan levels of funding our schools, we would have more money that doesn't only have to come from local areas. It can come from the federal government because, be real, when all of us are educated, we are more civically engaged, we are more productive, and we have our humanity developed in a way that we can see that we're part of a common good as opposed to it's only about me.
Yeah,
Natasha, yeah.
yeah, that's important. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, let's see, comment here. CTU centers children and teachers to keep schools strong for children. Neoliberal policy center business and tourism. How do we bridge the ideological gap among Chicago residents to develop support for schools?
Honestly, I think that Chicago residents already support Chicago schools. I think what we need is to build a political project to, as the previous comment was asking, to deconstruct the ways that inequalities like literally tie our hands from doing what we need to do in order to realize the dreams and visions of Chicago parents for their kids. I think that part of the reason why Mayor Brandon Johnson was elected was because he was seen as an advocate for social justice within the school system, and parents desire that. I think that to some degree we just have an unbalance of power in the city in Chicago, between cities and estates and between cities and urban areas. And so I would, I think we would have support if we also had like very concrete solutions as to how we can achieve this. And we have to do it in ways that cannot be blocked by the business community that wants tax revenues for their developments, and they do not want to be taxed in order to help out our like Chicago's children and the nation's children writ large.
Yeah, that's real. All right, so I'm going to revert back to, also being community. There are parent discussions that are happening across the city.
Mm-hmm.
Those who really are trying to really stay focused on their school, their children's needs, and really, really focusing on communities. There are a lot of conversations that are happening. So if you aren't already connected, there's a community that is probably building at your school or local coffee shop. So, the idea is to just feel, really connected. There's a lot of best practices. There are a lot of folks who have seen these, different iterations, and are, just, ready, to be called into the community to start having discussions. So, no matter what your vantage point, one thing that I am clear about is, when you talk about business interests in CPS, it is real. It's true that there is I don't know if there's another city department that everyone has an interest in other than that is greater than CPS,
Hmm.
right? So whether you have a child in the building or you live across the street or down the street, this really is an opportunity to, really shift some of the converse or the discourse towards, rolling up our sleeves. I saw someone gave a suggestion to, philanthropic support for the district. We saw that come to fruition in previous years. I think particularly most recently amid the pandemic. So there's some recommendations on the table for, I think, what the city saw back during the Mayor Harold Washington days, right? Where there's this education summit of, I would say all hands on deck approach to, academia, right? Parents, community, and we business sector. And what we know came out of that was school reform that included local school councils. So I think we're in this moment where it's a lot of opportunity on the table to engage in this way. Stephanie, I'm curious, like, what are your colleagues? I know you mentioned a little bit about some of the things that make your colleagues feel fearful. Are you all also creating those spaces and communities and having these discussions right now?
Oh yeah, actually, on the kind of like national level, I'm engaged with a community of scholars that are looking particularly at school financing practices. And I mean, we know we're nerds, we know it's wonky, but at some point we have to learn from each other so that way we can come back into these spaces. And then also, just I think like yeah, there's more, I think, even outside of just my general area, people are starting to pay more attention to finance as like part of the kind of the reason, I mean, the reason, or at least like some of the biggest benefactors of the ways that we finance schools today. And seeing that as problematic and how do we can restructure the system so that way we're not just, a financial stream for financial interest. And I'm having those discussions at various levels within my own within like local Chicago universities, as well as, like I said, at the national level too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. All right, so I have one more question. This is from a school leader. School leaders are fearful of special interest control. Broad stroke on what special interests mean. They could really care less about, the current decisions that are up to the board and, city leadership. What they really want to know is how can they do their jobs and really feel safe to do their jobs and feel good about advocating for more funds. So I'm curious in your work, how have school leaders, are there any best practices that you can share? Because, sometimes folks feel stuck in spaces like these. I know folks who have letters behind their name who are highly intelligent. They're also people and impacted by, the climate of just uncertainty. So I'm curious in your work, how have you seen, like, what best practices would you share that you've seen school leaders use in this moment, both to, communicate the need without, I would just say honestly, without, yeah, to really unpack these complicated financial decisions. Because what I'm looking for here is that sounds to me like school leaders could really use some of those best practices in real time.
Sure, but I'll tell you what, I'm not the person to ask. That is not my research area. And in fact, the more I'm hearing you talk about the role of LSCs and what we could be doing at the LSC level, the more I'm thinking I need to get involved in a research project that's focusing on what you all are achieving, and like how like like a commitment of community-based people it can like put pressure on CTU, I'm sorry, CPS and the school board to design policies that like real people are concerned about and not just like what a bunch of technocrats are like yelling at each other about. So I've got nothing to say, but thank y'all for doing the work you're doing.
Thank you for that. And then, like as we transition to just maybe share some closing thoughts, one of the things that I think is, important is for, parents to really have and monitor, to really have a space and a community to have these conversations, to be able to ask and determine at your school level based on your children's need that information that's available to local school councils. This is the time to start hosting those state of the schools. They're required certain times of the year, but given potential mid-year shifts, we should be planning for that. So on your meeting agendas, I would say my recommendation would be for LSCs, which includes principals, right? Would be to put on your meeting agenda a discussion that really gives an impact of all of the resources that you have in your school today, and then start having exercises around what would it look like should some of those protections, should some of that be cut, and in mid-year, right? We've seen mid-year cuts before in the past, and how that creates, just a ton of uncertainty, and really does impact classroom learning. So I would think that is, to me, the best that folks can do right now, is to start talking about, again, not to gaslight or feel gaslit or panic in this moment, but to start having those conversations around what conditions, what supports, where are the grants, who are the volunteers that can help fill gaps, should your school be experiencing those. Now is the time to be having those conversations. Stay connected to the work. Stephanie, closing remarks. What would you like to leave us with?
Don't be afraid to get nerdy. Like, I think like so many people think they're going to bore other people to death if these start talking about like things with numbers and math and stuff. It's not true. I find so many people want to be educated, and educated in, like you said, a dispassionate way, one that's not supporting necessarily like a particular political like project as much as it is like what is the best that we can do. And part of that is that I think we can get intimidated when people try to pull out like numbers or types of policies that we've never heard about, and that makes us close down. One way you can like stand up is to like arm yourself with these kinds of policies, facts, figures. Get nerdy.
Someone just posted here that Valerie wishes there was more transparency with the school's budget. Yeah, I would talk to your LSC there. If you are a parent or a community member, remember those budgets are open for public inspection. You can go to that school and say, hey, I'd like to have a copy of your recent school, or of your school budget, per the Freedom of Information Act that is available to all of us. And if you're not getting that, I would say use the sort of chain of command, the principal, the LSC. If you're a community member, those community reps on the LSC, go to the LSC meeting and speak during public comment and make your request publicly known there. And if not, the district also has a FOIA mechanism where you can, just Google CPS FOIA, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act is the acronym. And submit your request in that way. That makes it official record, and CPS will work with the school to release that budget. And in the meantime, we as LSC trainers are also looking for the district to share its annual budget. It used to be posted on the website, and with the level of detail that our trainers have been able to do a deep dive to show you all, the public LSCs, how to find details of where those discretionary funds, to really have a good, deep understanding of where budgets are. We haven't seen that listed in the district for this year's budget. So we, really implore the district to share that, but also advocate for that on your end as well. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us for today. I appreciate you. Let's stay connected. I imagine we will need to, and invite you back if there's as things develop to have more conversation.
Thank you very much, Natasha. And I really love this conversation.
I
Appreciate you.
appreciate you. Take care. Have a great day. All right, y'all. So as we move to wrap up for today's conversation, again, just want to thank y'all for joining us for today. We will post on our social media the links to what we discussed today. Want to invite you all to stay connected to our events. We are hosting our monthly parent leaders meeting that's going to be held next week. And that's going to be next week, Wednesday, October 16th at Carter G. Woodson Regional Library on 95th, or I should say 9525 South Halsted. Free food, parking. It's really an opportunity to stay connected and fellowship and talk about things that are important to you. So come out and join us for that. We will be traveling across the city, so join us at Carter G. Woodson. If you'd like for us to come out to your community, your neighborhood, invite us. Let us know where we can bring the things, and we will be there because that's what we think is important. Again, LSCs, training, let us know if we can come out to your school, your community for LSC training. We are, like I said, there are 4 of us in our training cohort that really work together to move around the city. You'll see us in your LSC meetings to make a plug there. Again, we really do mean that we do this for free because we see the importance in the empowerment. So not only training, we share best practices, and again, decades of experience to share for LSC knowledge. So we look forward to staying connected with you. Check out our new podcast, From Selected to Elected, Unpacking the Chicago Board of Education. Stay tuned to our social media. We will see you soon. Take care, be well. Have a good afternoon, y'all. Bye now.